The blood of BAAL. I can feel them getting closer. It has been months since my subductor majoris laughed that barking laugh of hers in my face. I had made no sense, I freely admit. Vague premonitions were all I had, the sound of slow drips, the feel of undulating movement, a golden light too distant to offer comfort. How does one communicate a nameless dread? Emperor, forgive me, but I am scared. Even now, after so many nights pumped full of stims, my body breaking down through lack of sleep, I feel it drawing nearer. Maybe if my security detail allowed me to sleep, to recover, I can make sense of it. But then I might dream. I can't endure another dream like the last one. One more nightmare leaking out of the cicatrix maledictum. The subductor majoris had sneered. I wonder now why she hadn't seen it herself. Maybe she had and was afraid. She should be. We all should be. I felt the scratching in my head. I felt the caress of something slick in my mind. Testing. Questing. The spreading darkness is before me now, even without sleep. It builds into a thunderhead of shadow. It pulls into oceans of black ink. I see the candles of worlds illuminated by minds of my brothers and sisters, first dimmed, then extinguished. It's curious. Many of the flames swell, their light too bright before the shadow reaches them. Locked here in my warded and sanctified quarters, awaiting censure, I cannot tell whether or not what I see is some echo of the future, some portent of abominable terror. I pray my jailers will tire of my existence before long. Personal Journal of Keisha Ananguru, Subductor Astropathicus Minoris, Thyrean Relay Station. The cicatrix maledictum yawns wide. Half of the Imperium of mankind is cut off from the guiding light blazing from Terra. In the darkened Imperium Nihilus, the Blood Angels and their successor chapters fight for their very survival against hordes of ravening Xenos, for the Tyranids will not be sated. The region of space known as the Red Scar is an irradiated and crimson-lit swathe of star systems and gas nebulae. Through its bio-rich subsectors, a tendril of HiveFleet Leviathan had wormed its way, uncountable living vessels, each filled with swarming horrors. The Tyranids had invaded the Cryptus shield worlds, their rapidly evolving monstrosities overwhelming the Imperial defences in just a few days of ferocious destruction. A single cry for aid, escaping the suffocating shadow in the warp. It was received by the Blood Angels, whose homeworld of BAAL lay directly in the line of the Tyranids' rapacious advance. Chapter Master Dante's call to arms was answered by many of the Blood Angels' successor chapters. As the Tyranids bore down upon the BAAL system, their numbers blotted out the stars, raining spores filled with Xenos warriors upon the planet BAAL and its moons. The death toll mounted on both sides, but the aliens' losses were rapidly replaced. On every front, the depleted Space Marines were pushed back. The sons of Sanguinius were on the brink of extinction when the Great Rift suddenly ripped wide and engulfed much of the BAAL system in a storm of warp energy. Through the devastation wrought upon the encircling hive ships, the cicatrix maledictum was at first BAAL's saviour. Now, however, the insidious effects of the Great Rift's psychic trauma are felt throughout the Red Scar and present a new and terrible threat. A shadow grows, and the region's citizens begin to feel a horrible scratching in their skulls. A Red Feast. When the Great Devourer turned its galaxy-spanning hunger to the Imperial star systems scattered throughout the Red Scar, the Blood Angels stood in their path. The sons of Sanguinius resisted the Xenos tirelessly, fighting not only to safeguard Imperial space, but to defend their homeworld of BAAL itself. For the chapter's very survival was at stake. By giving a name to the myriad Tyranid incursions, the Ordo Xenos believed they understood them. The HiveFleet, codenamed Leviathan, was recorded ravaging sectors to the galactic south. Yet invasions by creatures exhibiting similar colorations and tendencies struck at isolated sectors all over the galaxy. In reality, Leviathan's tendrils attacked from beneath the galactic plane, unlike other HiveFleets known to mankind. Regions could gain no advance warning of attack by monitoring this HiveFleet's serpentine course. Questing shoals of hungering bioships appeared seemingly at random from the frozen emptiness beyond the galaxy. In this way, many bio-rich worlds of the Red Scar were scoured of life before the Imperium could muster any defense. The Red Scar flares like an angry wheel over the hollow charts of the Ordo Astra. Its thousands of stars all shine a shade of crimson, tinting the worlds and gas clouds of the region with the colour of spilt blood. Each system is cursed with ferocious radiation emitted by these scarlet suns, and life there is exceptionally hard. But the Imperium never shirks from harsh conditions when there are valuable resources to acquire. Though billions died to embed permanent settlements, hundreds of the Red Scar's systems eventually ran to the noise of human industry beneath the ruddy stars. The tendril of HiveFleet Leviathan had wound its way through and around the Red Scar, was but a single proboscis of the gestalt organism that emerged from the intergalactic void. Nonetheless, it consisted of the greatest number of hive ships the Imperium had ever recorded. One curling spur of Leviathan's presence in the Red Scar would later be termed the Cryptoid Tendril, for in its path were the shield worlds of Cryptus. This populous binary system was just one of countless territories threatened by the Tyranids, which the Imperium took decisive steps to defend. Vital for its refined promethium and advanced solar energy arrays, Cryptus received reinforcement from several Astra Militarum regiments and other Imperial forces. Guardsmen, tanks, and even a mission of battle sisters were sacrificed to defend Cryptus, but one by one the system's worlds were overcome. When Cryptus's signal reached BAAL, the Shield World's struggle was already known to Commander Dante, Chapter Master of the Blood Angels. Whether the system stood or fell, the Tyranids would inexorably advance upon the chapter's homeworld of BAAL. But if the Xenos could be bled enough at Cryptus, then maybe BAAL stood a chance. The Blood Angels pushed back the Xenos at Cryptus with furious assaults, but the unending waves of Tyranids pouring into each battle zone threatened to grind the sons of Sanguinius down. It was then that the war upon the Shield Worlds woke their ancient inhabitants, the Necrons, whose tomb had orbited the binary star for eons, unknown to the Imperium. It was only a weary pact made with these fleshless aliens that saw Cryptus's worlds finally flensed of Tyranids, though at great cost. The surviving Blood Angels now made for BAAL, knowing the homeworld was at risk. Dante issued a summons to as many of the Blood Angels' successor chapters as could be reached. Companies from almost every one of them answered the call. As the HiveFleets drew nearer, the planet was fortified, as it had not been for millennia. Even the able-bodied amongst its tribespeople were armed and stationed throughout the system. Many within the fortress monastery upon BAAL itself. Dante hoped it would be enough, for when the Tyranids of HiveFleet Leviathan descended on BAAL, their approaching bioships obscured the ruddy stain of the Red Scar with their numbers. The ravening swarms fell upon BAAL like a deluge. A flood of teeth and chitin poured towards the firing space marines, as the air became a toxic soup of alien spores and caustic rain. One after another, the Blood Angels' carefully layered defences were overcome by weeks of savage fighting. Amidst the relentless tumult, the Tyranids' invasion rapidly adapted its tactics, heedless of the thousands of beasts lost every moment. As defences fell to infiltrator organisms, and fresh swarms poured forth to meet the blazing guns of the Blood Angels. It was then that the galaxy itself screamed. From the Eye of Terror to the eastern fringe, the great rift tore the galaxy asunder, and mankind's realm was divided. Warp storms ravaged many of the Imperium's traumatized survivors, and the BAAL system was not spared, becoming caught in a roiling gale of energy. Clustered in orbit like predators around a dying animal, the Tyranid hive ships had been lashed mercilessly. When the Blood Angels were next able to focus their augers heavenward, the Xenos ships had vanished. Upon BAAL, continent-spanning swarms of monstrosities and scuttling weapon beasts remained, reverting now to their more bestial instincts. The Blood Angels did not understand what had occurred in orbit, but sensed the chance to regain the initiative now that the Tyranid hordes on BAAL were severed from the star-spanning intelligence directing them. The Xenos did not fall back before the Blood Angels' counter-assaults, however, but instead flung themselves forward with greater hunger and ferocity. The Blood Angels teetered on the brink of extinction. Though the hive ships were gone, the BAAL system's world still teemed with Xenos. It was but one system of thousands in Warzone BAAL, which encompassed the Red Scar and its fringes. Within each one, the Tyranids swarmed and feasted. Our light shall not gutter out beneath the shroud of blackness. The Xenos filth will not prevail. My vow to you, all of you, who share the Angel's noble blood, we will cast down these beasts. We will sunder their hosts, for their end has come. Commander Dante, Lord of the Angelic Host. Duties demand. The Blood Angels battling the Tyranids on BAAL were faced with the possibility of utter destruction. Yet the opening of the Great Rift brought salvation unlooked for. As the Tyranids fought on with savage instincts, a figure from another time swept out of the tortured warp, with reinforcements and dolorous tidings. The Blood Angels and their successors fought for the world of BAAL with sharpened blades and blazing bolt fire. Where ammunition ran dry or combat knives were blunted, they lashed out with kicks and punches. Enhanced musculature and hardened ceramite were pitted against snapping maws and raking talons. At stake was the survival of the entire system. BAAL's mortal citizens fought too, for they knew that no mercy could be expected from the Tyranids. All believed it could be BAAL's final hours, and they fought with the fury of those with nothing left to lose. Beyond the spore-choked skies, the Tyranid bioships in orbit had been brutally swept into oblivion by the warp storms that roiled in the wake of the Great Rift. In their place, the turbulent void miraculously disgorged a new fleet. Approaching BAAL, the incoming ships transmitted Imperial identifiers to the Blood Angels, revealing that they hailed from Terra. But the chrono-idents were so corrupted that BAAL's logisticians could ascertain no fixed origin time. These were the ships of the Indomitus Crusade, the immense force which was spreading out from Terra to reclaim and defend mankind's dominion. They found the Blood Angels' positions on BAAL's surface to be steadily contracting before the encircling Tyranid swarms. The ships unloaded searing barrages of macro-cannon shells into the Xenos to stall their advance, before releasing wings of attack craft and countless dropships. The warriors they carried were Primera Space Marines, who owed their genesis to the far-reaching tactical acumen of Rabute Gilliman, and it was none other than the Avenging Sun himself who now coordinated the Imperial attack. Clad in the colours of Blood Angels, the Flesh Tearers, and other chapters of Sanguinius's line, the incoming waves of Adeptus Astartes warriors inspired the depleted defenders to resurgent acts of savagery. Many Imperial lives were lost as defenders and crusaders hammered the Tyranids away from their lines. However, after days of battle, the combined Imperial armies stilled the aliens' impetus across half the planet, giving the Blood Angels breathing room to consolidate. Gathering for the first time since the battle for BAAL had commenced, Dante and the other chapter masters formally accepted the Primaris reinforcements and arcane technology required to create more. Only Gabriel Seth, of the Flesh Terrors, harboured reservations about the gift's implications, but his warriors had been impressed with those Primaris Space Marines who fought in their livery. Guilliman shared with the chapter master the terrible tidings of the Great Rift and its consequences for humanity, even as many of these leaders stared at him, struck by the presence of one hailing from a time of legend. Guilliman concluded by appointing Commander Dante as Regent of Imperium Nihilus, a responsibility both deeply humbling in its honour and immeasurably weighty in its magnitude. With swarms remaining upon the homeworld and its sister planets, the future of BAAL was by no means secure, yet Guilliman's fleet made preparations to move on, for there were regions whose peril was far greater. The sons of Sanguinius now drew plans for a counter-offensive to cleanse the rest of the system. Revitalized by reinforcements and fresh purpose, Dante and the commanders of the successor chapters struck out from positions that had nearly been the site of their doom. Strike forces assembled by the surviving allies swept forward to rid BAAL of the Tyranid hordes. The Blood Angels were determined to capitalize on the creature's severed link to the hive mind, not knowing how quickly it could be reknitted. Weeks of further bloodshed ensued, and BAAL's already battle-torn deserts were churned to mud as they became soaked with blood and ichor. The Tyranid dead piled high to form a stinking, unending bloodscape. The might of the Primaris Space Marines was proved beyond question in these battles, and the Blood Angels wasted no time in beginning to muster further waves of this new breed of warrior. Many of the young tribesmen who had bravely defended BAAL were remade as Primaris Space Marines, having proved their worth 10 times over during the horrific invasion. They were not the only ones to undergo transformation, for the Blood Angels' sinister chief librarian Mephiston undertook the dangerous crossing of the Rubicon Primaris. Together, the Imperial armies finally crushed the last of the Tyranid swarms. However, not for a moment did the Blood Angels believe that BAAL was entirely cleansed of the Xenos presence. There were likely wounded or cut-off creatures still hiding in desert caves or buried beneath the dunes of sand and corpses. And who knew how long the countless spores which had rained down on the planet would remain dormant before bearing their hideous fruit. The task of hunting down the Xenos remnants fell to surviving tribesmen and neophyte space marines, but finding lone organisms paled against the immense duties now placed upon Dante, duties which the relative lull in hostilities now allowed him to appreciate more fully. The Blood Angels and their successors had been mauled. Despite the much-needed influx of Primaris Space Marines, no chapter on BAAL stood at full number. Even those that were still strategically functional had lost immeasurable tactical strength, including veterans of centuries, ancient and irreplaceable war gear, and even many chapter masters. Ranged against them were the predatory infestations on the other worlds of the BAAL system, and many others spread throughout the Red Scar and its fringe regions. The fate of the Tyranid biovessels that had vanished from BAAL's orbit remained unknown, but Dante was assured by his blood-weeping astropaths that no similar disappearances had occurred elsewhere. Quite possibly the Tyranids had not even noticed the loss. Their numbers were legion, their hunger limitless. Lord Guilliman's reports of the galactic turmoil shocked Dante. Throughout the Imperium Nihilus, numberless terrified worlds were beset by horrors. Who knew how many systems mankind's enemies had already leapt upon, sensing weakness? Wielding the authority of terror, the Blood Angels were to be the Emperor's hand beyond the Great Rift. Dante resolved to make this a gauntlet dripping in the blood of mankind's enemies. The Lord of the Angelic Host gathered his senior advisors and fellow chapter masters. Together they determined that reclaiming the remainder of the BAAL system must be their first priority. With the home system secure, Dante would then set in motion the Angel's Halo, an ambitious plan of reconquest that would strike at free nearby systems to establish them as staging posts for further expansion. To support these free chosen theatres, Dante and his fellow chapter masters dispatched forces to fight holding actions and reclamation operations throughout the region, intercepting or delaying Tyranid reinforcements. Dante did not hesitate to call upon the full breadth of his newly conferred authority as regent of the Imperium Nihilus. If the Red Scar was to survive, the Angel's Halo could not be allowed to fail. Post status addendum ZBI1 ex tenebris dal. As the reports make clear, my lady, our efforts to secure new specimens from the Red Scar system has suffered greatly. Even my contacts among the Xenos traffickers and dealers in bioesoterica have been strangely unable to furnish me with viable samples, despite persuasion. Their usual avenues of procurement have evaporated. It is as if the Xenos of the Red Scar are actively avoiding even the most tangential contact with humanity. Our Puritan fellows would rejoice, no doubt, but as a hunter, I need to know what has suddenly marked us out for avoidance by my quarry. I have served the Holy Ordo for more than a century, yet never have I felt more isolated. Never have I felt the immense distance of the interstellar void more acutely. Where once the gaze of my augmetics beheld multitudinous prey, my febrile imagination now casts us as the exposed and vulnerable mortal. Rover Targ, Reclamator Alpha, Order Xenos. Transmission origin unknown. The spread of shadow. Warzone BAAL reeled under the onslaught of the Tyranids. Its thousands of systems writhed as they were consumed. Each prey world was isolated by the suffocating psychic voice of the hive mind. The psychers on those planets tortured to the point of insanity. The Tyranids spread throughout the flourishing systems of the Red Scar, even to those weakly bound to its fringes. An invisible psychic miasma accompanied their advance, a phenomenon that the Imperium had long learned to fear as the shadow in the warp. It engulfed entire systems, cutting off cries for help and crippling the defenders' ability to flee. As the Tyranids came to infest the entire region, there was nowhere they were not felt. Astropaths went insane, trying to send the simplest visions. When the Great Rift split reality in the midst of this terror, many psychers in the Red Scar dared to believe that the galaxy was responding to the Tyranids' unnatural psychic taint. The Imperium fought back viciously against the Tyranids throughout the Red Scar systems. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters formed the Blade's Edge in these bloody actions, but the Space Marines were few. Many battle zones comprised only a small number of squads of Sanguinius' sons, supported by Astra Militarum or forces from Forge Worlds or sacred shrines. The Blood Angels encountered panic and terror amongst the surviving populations. Desperate riots broke out. People screamed uncontrollably, and kin fought kin. Trepidation was understandable before the encroaching hordes, but in some cases the violence had to be ruthlessly stamped out. In the Diadan subsector, the librarians of the Angel Sanguine witnessed this terror as spawned violence even amongst their allies. Screaming guardsmen dashed their heads against ferrocrete walls, and Skitarii warriors became caught in fevered logic loops, oily blood pouring from their emitters. When the Tyranids' smothering psychic pall fell over a world, even the librarians' fortified minds strained to endure its touch. The Imperium had long known that non-psychers felt the Tyranids' psychic presence as a shroud of unnatural dread, but never had its effects been witnessed to this degree. Stretched as thinly as they were across Warzone BAAL, The Blood Angels and their successors could ill afford such bewildering afflictions amongst the ranks of their allies. While the exact source of these disturbing phenomena could not yet be fathomed, a further problem faced the war zone's populations. Since the opening of the Great Rift, the black ships that normally collected tithes of psychers from Imperial worlds had not been seen within the Red Scar. It was rumoured that these clandestine vessels employed select navigator houses and operated out of extensive facilities across the galaxy. If they could not reach the Red Scar to remove potential psychers, the consequences for the region might prove catastrophic. More and more psychers appeared in the refugee camps to which so many civilians had been shipped like groks. Each psychic mind represented a threat to the Imperium's safety, and the librarians of the Blood Angels and their successor chapters saw their responsibility clearly. If the black ships could not discharge their duty, then the Space Marine psychers would have to act. Thus, a great collective of librarians took up watch over the refugee psychers, though it tore them away from their duties on the front lines. The librarians tested the minds of as many of the aberrant humans as they could, probing for any psychic weakness. It was well that the librarians undertook this work, but its scale was monumental. The levels of psychic potential they found amongst the human refugees went beyond anything that could be explained by the absence of the black ships. The librarians uncovered many fledgling psychers struggling to comprehend or control their newfound powers. Once identified, they were isolated and subjected to invasive psychic interrogation to determine the manner of threat they posed. Yet for every psyker so screened, many others lost control before they could be found. Some were horrified by the acts they committed, while others revelled in their unbridled power. The Tyranids did not fail to notice this unexpected new weakness amongst their human prey. The hive mind observed through the senses of its almost limitless progeny, and responded as it always did. With unnatural speed, invasion swarms across the immense breadth of the Red Scar adapted. Soon, Blood Angel strike forces encountered broods of psyker beasts on every battlefield. The veterans of previous Tyranid wars had seen the aliens adapt in this way, but usually only in response to the pure psychic might of Adeptus Astartes' warrior mystics. Now, Xenos strains, wreathed in coronas of crackling bio-sorcery, were reported upon battlefields where there were no librarians at all. To the Blood Angels on the front lines, it seemed clear that the Xenos had sensed the absence of Space Marine psychers and sought to take advantage by harnessing their own psychic might. Upon some worlds, the Imperium was able to counterstrike with sufficient power to prevail against the ravenous Tyranids. Yet such victories were few. For often the hive mind's concentrated use of psyker beasts crushed the sanity of mankind's defenders. Under such creatures' baleful gaze, entire squads of guardsmen writhed in psychic torment before dropping as one. Even the sons of Sanguinius fell, their armor cracked open by lances of psychic witchfire. Every battlefield of war-zone BAAL, it seemed, was saturated with the power, the terror, and the unpredictability of the warp. Stars, red with blood. The Blood Angels' homeworld was saved, but the cost had been terrible, and the war was far from over. Faced with the enormity of the Tyranids' fleets and numberless bio-horrors they carried, the Blood Angels and their successor chapters fought on nobly, launching the Angels' Halo offensive to take the fight to the stars. Not all of the Blood Angels' successor chapters that had survived the battle for BAAL continued to fight in the region. Many chapter masters took their newly inducted Primaris Space Marines and left, while some planned to return and fortify their own holdings. Others redeployed at Dante's request to strategically important systems outside the Red Scar, preparing the way for the liberation of the wider Imperium Nihilus. Those chapters pledged to continue aiding Dante and the Blood Angels. Some, such as the Flesh Tearers, fought in the name of their shared lineage. Others did so in deference to Dante's title of Regent of Imperium Nihilus. For their commanders had witnessed Rabute Guilliman bestow that honour upon the bringer of Sanguinius's light. The redeployment and reinforcement of the Blood Angels and their successors was no swift task. While new battle brothers were trained, wounds healed and repairs made, small forces braved the churning warp to reconnoitre the very nearest systems. His chapter returned to fighting strength. Dante coordinated the retaking of the BAAL system himself, taking a squadron of ships to the outer world of Keru, a scrub-covered moon of a gas giant, used by the Blood Angels as a monitoring station. The Tyranids had originally been drawn to the planetoid by the immense reserves of complex gases locked in its crust. Their hive ships were now gone, dispersed by the fury of the warp storms, but hordes of weapon beasts still befouled the moon's small Sensoria cities. If Dante could reclaim this infested part of his chapter's home system, it would form a strong centre from which the Angel's halo could expand. The Blood Angels launched their initial landings, and the battle began in earnest. While Dante fought to secure dominance of the BAAL system, Gabriel Seth took the Flesh Terrors out into the void. The Angel's halo strategy called for the taking of 3 initial targets, which Dante had termed the Points of Grace, to be seized as the Imperium's forces spread outwards in an expanding wave from the BAAL system. These points were strategic foci that were vital to the wider purging of the Red Scar, by virtue of their position or their assets. Each of the 3 Points of Grace could be reached by a series of very short warp jumps, plotted around the scattered astropathic relays and substations. Yet even attempting these caused loss of life and severe damage to the largest of ships. Seth volunteered the Flesh Terrors to take the first Point of Grace, the planet Ashelon, in the Kronos system. This industrial world was a key supplier to many systems, but Dante had chosen it for another reason. Navigators and astropaths from the Blood Angels' fleet had reported that the system was completely lost to their arcane sight. Many systems in the Red Scar were shadowed, but the darkness surrounding Ashelon was denser than most. More disturbingly, this shadow was growing. Something lurked there, spreading its influence. Few in the Imperial armies could agree on what it might be, but Seth knew in his heart that it could not be allowed to continue. Meanwhile, the Blood Angels and Angels in Carmine sent vanguard forces to the second Point of Grace, the linked space stations and orbital platforms of Gamma 4 system. These facilities contained a significant astropathic relay, which made the otherwise uninhabited systems a regular way station for ships undertaking perilously long journeys. No word had been received from the bonded armsmen employed by the Adeptus Astronomica to protect the site, and the vanguard warriors were tasked with ensuring its security or learning of its fate. Having vowed to reclaim the planet identified as the third Point of Grace, Captain Sendini of the Blood Angels' 5th Company assaulted the fortress world of Balik Alphas. Granted reserves from the 9th Company and a significant number of the armory's remaining assets, Sendini did not believe in being overcautious. The firepower at his command would, he believed, allow the Blood Angels to destroy whatever Tyranids had managed to make it past Balik Alphas' formidable defences. Once secure, the planet would provide the Sons of Sanguinius with a strong anchor point from which assaults on other systems could be launched. Unbeknownst to the Blood Angels and their allies, the Leviathan fleets swarming through the Red Scar were more than aware of events in the BAAL system. Synaptic imperatives passed from one organism to another, between fleets that were many light years apart. Leviathan's experience in many parts of the galaxy had given it the opportunity to learn. It was familiar with mankind's varied armies, and the way in which they moved through the void and defended prey worlds. Through an aggregated stimulus and response on a vast scale, the HiveFleet ensured that its organisms surrounding the BAAL system went into overdrive, adapting, modifying, and devouring. Dante also dispatched smaller missions in support of the Angel's Halo strategy. Ships carrying no more than a few squads undertook short warp jumps to relieve embattled convoys of material or refugees. They tested Tyranid forces for weakness and conducted lightning-fast vertical insertions to perform assassinations and extractions. All the while, the ship's augurs strove to increase Dante's knowledge of both the Tyranids' disposition and the state of the warp storms across the Red Scar. The fragmentary reports these forces were able to send made for grim reading. The surging warp storms, born in the aftermath of the Great Rift, showed no sign of calming. The shadow in the warp was in evidence throughout the entire Red Scar. Tyranid HiveFleets carved through many Imperial systems, and wherever their malignant touch reached, madness flowed. The approach of the Tyranids' hive ships appeared to coincide with claims of horrific psychic phenomena. Hope was in short supply, but not yet extinguished. Dante's attacks from BAAL had prepared the way for further forays, and with the increasing number of Primaris Space Marines being created, there was still a chance they could prevail. The democracy of death. With the arcane biotechnology to create Primaris Space Marines and genetic samples of unprecedented purity revealed by Archmagus Call, hopes were kindled. Perhaps the growing curse of the Black Rage could finally be arrested. Within the breasts of the sanguinary priests, desperate belief clutched at the assurances made by the tech priest. The genetic lineage would be undiluted. The scions of Sanguinius would be cleansed. There were doubters and naysayers. Some posited that the closer to the angel's purity the genetic samples were, the closer to his sacrifice their warriors would be, thus intensifying the death visions brought on during the eve of battle. Others questioned the wisdom of eliminating the curse at all, claiming that surely in willing themselves to overcome and suppress the madness, they maintained the strength and nobility of their primogeniture. The Battle Brothers, newly inducted into the Blood Angels and their successors in the aftermath of BAAL's salvation, proved to be worthy of their chapters. Whether survivors of the original warriors brought to BAAL by Guilliman's fleet, or matured using Call's imparted technology, they were strong and pure of heart. But hope in these times can be treacherous. It was the Angels in Carmine who first revealed to Commander Dante the induction of Primaris Space Marines into their death company. Since then, the Blood Angels and each of their successor chapters have seen their death companies filled just as readily with wearers of ebon-painted Mark X power armor. While some commanders lamented that their Primaris battle brothers would not now herald a new beginning, all chapter masters recognized what it truly meant, that the Primaris Space Marines were the true inheritors of Sanguinius' legacy. Execution's Edge. The Blood Angels tore towards the last major infestation of the BAAL system, determined to eradicate the Tyranids. Yet the aliens' loss of their hive ships had dulled neither their instincts nor their fangs. Blood Angels' vanguard forces spearheaded the assault against the Tyranids on the semi-desert world of Keru. From orbit, it was apparent that the Xenos were clustered around the fortifications erected by Keru's dwindling Blood Angels garrison. The entire Imperial presence on the arid Sentinel world was bottled up in 4 fortified Sensoria cities in the southern hemisphere. The Tyranids had surrounded these sites and were assaulting them in waves. Though cut off from the influence of the hive mind, the swarms were far from directionless as Dante had hoped. It was clear that some kind of control was still exerted over them. Lieutenant Pardialis led the force that advanced upon Sensorium Primus, the largest of the planet's facilities and its capital. When the Tyranids had invaded Keru, its human garrison had succumbed as quickly to madness as to the aliens' bioweapons. However, the Blood Angels posted to the planet, when BAAL was fortified, had defended it with dogged determination, holding their positions for several months. With the Tyranids pouring their main strength towards BAAL itself, the Sensoria cities on Keru had been able to marshal their reserves of ammunition, but these were on the verge of running out when Dante's ships arrived. Perdeleus and his Reaver squads made a vertical insertion via grav chutes, deploying 2 miles from the Sensorium Primus. Arriving towards sunset, the blood-red light of the BAAL system star masked their descent. Covert squads of infiltrators and incursors, who had worked their way from separate landing zones, now made contact. Out of the deepening shadows stalked also the chief librarian of the Blood Angels, Mephiston. Perdeleus had not been briefed as to the Lord of Death's presence, and he welcomed the sinister battle psycho wearily. The infiltrators and incursors had amassed a wealth of information concerning the tactical situation at Sensorium Primus. The Sensoria city stood at the foot of a cliff which shielded its delicate arrays from rogue voxgeists emitted from the south, but meant its defenders could not withdraw in that direction. Waves of Tyranids attacked the city's barricades, broods of weapon beasts fighting with claws or firing acidic gobbets that screeched through the air. In their midst stalked larger bioforms, leader beasts that bore diamond-hard talons and weapon symbiotes that spat living projectiles. All the while, the city's automated guns and remaining Blood Angels defenders fought to keep the beasts at bay. The vanguard struck as BAAL's star sank to the horizon. Arcing smoke grenades landed amongst the Tyranids, and the air filled with the sounds of a cracking chitin and erupting alien ichor. The infiltrators and incursors advanced from cover to cover along an ancient riverbed, firing ceaselessly. Attacking several broods at once, the Blood Angels spread out from their initial line of advance, each squad working in synchrony with their battle brothers. The Tyranids reacted instantly, turning to face the greater threat at their rear. Hormagaunts bounded over their dead through the dense fog of smoke and reeking physaline. Bolt shells, unimpeded by the thick haze, consistently found their mark, but where one Xenos fell, 3 more clawed their way forward. The swarm was now at the Blood Angels' throats, talons instinctively aiming at armor joints and eye lenses. The Reavers had waited for the optimum moment to strike. As one, silhouettes that had seemed part of the scrub became a blur of motion. Shock grenades exploded, and the Reavers' amplified roars sounded like predatory snarls of rage as their combat knives became bloodied. Through the shifting smoke, shrouding the swarm, Mephiston darted with uncanny speed, his hazy form outlined by arterial sprays. Death screeches filled the air around him as flashes of psychic power lit up the smoke. Then the vanguard suddenly withdrew. Reavers pulled back under the ferocious covering fire of incursors, and Mephiston threw up shimmering barriers that defied the living ammunition of the foe. Upon the dusty riverbeds, high banks, eliminators, previously motionless in pools of shadow, now chose their moment to fire their silent bolt sniper rifles at high-value targets amongst the Tyranids. The Xenos poured after the vanguard in an animalistic surge, but Dante had been right to sense a lingering control over the Xenos. While the main swarm instinctively pursued the Blood Angels, imperatives had pulsed outwards from the leader beasts, and lictors and gene-stealers now sprang from the thin scrub at the Space Marines' flanks and rear. Lightning-fast claws and talons tore through Mark 10 armor, hewing a gory path through the Blood Angels' ranks. Many assassin beasts were taken out by pinpoint bolt fire and sweeps of heavy blades, but the fighting was desperate. As night fell, a foul rain of spores began to descend from the sky, as the leader beasts' psychic impulses drove their forces to surround the vanguard. It was then that Dante's own forces entered combat. Tongues of flame speared from the night sky, illuminating red and golden warriors. As intended, Mephiston and the vanguard had drawn the Tyranids away from the Sensoria city, stretching the aliens' reach and forcing them to fight on 2 fronts. Acting on the vanguard force's information, The descending angels of Dante's sanguinary guard and suppressors first targeted the leader beasts, cutting the head from the serpent in a flurries of heavy fire and blows of crackling incarmine blades. Mephiston and Perdeleus led the vanguard to hammer the remaining broods, and after much bloodshed, the last traces of the swarm were finally put down. Ashelon. Ashelon's industrial heritage stretched back millennia. Its city-sized refineries and crenellated furnaces dating from the time of the Great Crusade. These were interspersed with less ancient hive cities built upon the deep foundations of former factorums. Each stood atop a warren of abandoned conduits and flues, gantry nests and echoing reservoirs, all slowly ground down by the hive city above them, like a moraine beneath a glacier. Though no records exist, it was held by some among the sector's noble families that Ashelon was once a forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, one of such magnificence that its rulers imperiously annexed system after system around it. This embroidered story told that the Council of Terror itself grew suspicious or jealous of Ashelon's rise and took the world forcibly, destroying its forged temples and executing its tech priests. Variations on the tale postulate that the Council acted with the compliance of the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose own political machinations are opaque, or that somehow agents of terror were able to remove knowledge of the world entirely from the tech priests' records. Such courtly gossip filled the days of those bored with power and filtered down the social scale, so that sump grubbers and criminal gangs came to pass the story around like a fairy tale, one given credence by the occasional piece of archaeotech dug up in the hive's bowels. The clearest expression of Ashelon's magnificent past was the Via Celestos. This immense structure, more a statement of power than a bridge, linked the world's capital refinery city to the equatorial vat farms miles further south. A miracle of forgotten engineering, its buttresses soared skyward for half a mile above the befouled industrial landscape. Not merely supporting a single thoroughfare, the Via Celestos comprised an interweaving morass of transitways, bisecting, curling, threading through each other. From orbit it appeared like the capital reached out with a mass of questing tendrils. A dark presence. As Dante attacked the swarms in the BAAL system, the flesh terrors plunged into the tortuous warp without hesitation, to reach the key industrial world of Ashelon. A creeping psychic darkness was spreading from the planet. Uncaring of its cause or implications, the flesh terrors aimed to find and rend apart the blight's source. Ashelon was hidden from the arcane senses of the flesh terrors' astropaths and navigators, their warp sight blind to its condition. Some reported a notion that a hideous slick mass of psychic accretion had built up around the system, while others were gripped by violent seizures as they tried to focus their warp sight upon it. The navigators could only take the fleet to the system's outer edge, describing visions of sliding down a stinking black gullet. Approaching Ashelon, Librarian Jarod pinpointed the source of the growing aura, a city-sized refinery in the planet's northern polar region. It was reachable only by a single megalithic bridge, the Via Celestos, spanning a toxic hell half a mile below. The Flesh Terror's ships passed Ashelon's orbital platforms, hanging shattered and dark above the planet. The massive structures bore gaping rents where Tyranid ships had forced their feeder tendrils in to gorge on the crews. Then, the Flesh Terrors themselves encountered Tyranids, bio-vessels still clustered in orbit, seeding the planet below with alien spores. Lance volleys blazed from the Imperial vessels, rupturing meters-thick cartilage, while bioplasma and pyroacid shot back at them. The violence of Seth's attack enabled dropships to descend through Ashelon's atmosphere. Within their holds, the mood was grim. Many battle brothers had succumbed to the Black Rage, and every flesh-tearer felt a simmering anger that threatened to boil into violence. Ashelon's polar regions were subject to intense disruptive energies, capable of tearing strike craft from the skies. This forced Seth to land armoured assets further south, denying him the direct orbital insertion that would have allowed his warriors to vent their rage quickly. Battle tanks and transports rumbled from the drop point and reached the Via Celestos. The bridge soared so high over the polluted land that sickly mists obscured its foundations. Within the transports, squads of flesh-tearers barely contained their rising ire, watched over closely by chaplains. Still, no broods poured out of the city, and the chapter master felt he was being drawn in. His suspicion proved prophetic when the skies darkened above the refinery ahead. The dark cloud swiftly resolved into dozens of winged creatures which swooped down upon the flesh-tearers. Spilling from their transports, the ebon warriors of the Death Company charged whatever they could reach, while intercessors formed a firebase. Corrosive bioammunition, melting armor seals and burrowing into flesh. But the flesh-tearers' firepower held the winged terrors at bay. As the rushing waves of aerial attacks continued, Seth's forces picked up Auspex warnings of foes closing from behind. The signals becoming stronger, larger. Horrors resembling mythic drakes plunged from the skies, spitting accelerated crystalline clusters that tore through armor plate. Turrets swiveled, tracks span. As the flesh-tearers column responded to threats from all sides, the escalating anger proved too much for some battle brothers. With screams of rage, intercessors broke ranks in ones and twos, racing towards whatever they now perceived the Tyranids to be. Out of the mists below, yet more Xenos rose, spiraling around the Gothic buttresses of the bridge. Stalled, disintegrating, the flesh-tearers were being dissected. As if to confirm their fate, a new cloud of dark shapes appeared in the east. Yet from its midst there came rockets and blinding beams of energy that swatted screeching Tyranids from the air. Valkyrie and Vendetta gunships had arrived. Only as they sped overhead could Vox be established. The remnants of the system's Aeronautica Imperialis had survived out of sight in Ashelon's darkened orbital platforms. Detecting the flesh-tearers' strike force, they had fought through Tyranid swarms of their own to reach the Space Marines' position. The surviving flesh-tearers snatched the opportunity created by the Imperial air assault to break out of the trap and surge onwards to the refinery city. Librarian Jarod led Seth and his blood-hungry warriors to the source of the sickening psychic miasma, the city's half-ruined astropathic tower. There they would end it. Under a gaping rent in the tower's roof, the flesh-tearers found a bloated bioform in the remains of a spore sac. Veins of energy linked it to the twitching husks of slack-jawed astropaths. It was some breed of psycho beast, Seth guessed, engorged with power like nothing he had ever seen. With a shout, Jarod cleaved the nearest astropath in two, before a screech command filled the air. Monstrous Xenos suddenly broke straight through the walls and tore the librarian apart with crushing claws. Seth felt he understood. This thing was using the astropaths, draining them to project its black will into the void. His chainsword, Blood Reaver, ripped through the air, shearing immense talons in half, each backswing messily beheading an astropath. The flesh-tearers unleashed their rage, driving their weapons again and again into the Xenos with grisly fervor. The ruined tower was awash with gore when Seth finally plunged his churning blade through the psycho beast's brain, freeing the system from its growing taint. "Predator, and prey. The fortress world of Bellic Alphas was the shield of its subsector. Its garrison had held out bravely behind the planet's strong defences, yet their troops' resolve was faltering in the face of unexplained phenomena. Unknown to them, Blood Angel's reinforcements neared. But other eyes were not so blind to the Blood Angel's approach. The strike force arrived at Bellic Alphas in perfect coordination. The ships had been delayed and scattered by their winding path through the unquiet warp, but the final translation was flawless, and they re-entered real space with a storm of firepower. Blasted with macro cannons, some bioships withdrew into the void, trailing frozen gouts of ichor, while others aggressively attacked. Even as the orbital battle raged, Blood Angels under Captain Sendini of the 5th Company made planetfall. As the Blood Angels' gunships descended, some squadrons peeled off. These carried task forces of Phobos-armoured Vanguard Space Marines entrusted with obtaining caches of weaponry and technology. Bellic Alphas was rumoured to harbour huge stockpiles of the flesh-melting mutagenic acid used to produce Hellfire shells. Securing this substance for Dante's other forces would greatly improve their chances against the Tyranids elsewhere in the Red Scar. The Blood Angels' primary target was the fortified port complex at Riken. Its besieged gatehouse was holding out, but the overrun city around it gave the swarms all the cover they needed. Xenos forays had so far been repulsed, but there was no way for the Astra Militarum garrison to break out and shatter the horde with massed firepower. In accordance with strict strategic doctrines, the garrison had sent all of the port's soldiers to defend the gatehouse, but Sendini had no appetite for blinkered siege theory. He would secure Riken on his own terms. Within moments, the fluid adaptability of the Adeptus Astartes had identified the means to crush the swarm. The Blood Angels' gunships landed at the deserted port itself as Sandini gave instructions to the garrison commander to evacuate the fortress and join the Space Marines. It was ruthless, but Sandini knew the advantage outweighed the cost. The Tyranids would be led where he wanted them. The commander's reply was almost lost in the noise of anti-air cannons sweeping the port's skies, but garbled words could be heard, describing horrifying incidents concerning his men. Of more strategic concern to Sendini were reports of severe seismic disturbances felt across Bellic Alphas for months. Though the port itself had been stable of late, data inloads from the garrison's cogitators revealed that 3 outposts and their defenders had disappeared into suddenly yawning chasms. On Sendini's instruction, the garrison abandoned the bunker complex that formed Riken's gatehouse. No longer held back by its defensive guns, the Tyranids smashed into it. A trio of Carnifexes charged, their spined and plated limbs tearing through the reinforced portal, heedless of any damage to themselves. In their wake, hundreds of smaller beasts screeched and hissed as they chased the garrison making for the port. Behind the gatehouse complex lay a loading area criss-crossed with servo-hauler tracks, and beyond that the port itself. Riken Port had been built within a natural depression, and tiers of control towers and basilicaniums encircled its landing zones, like an amphitheatre. As the garrison withdrew, the suppressors fired into the oncoming Tyranids, shadowing the Imperial soldiers until they reached the cover of the port buildings. Now Sendini made his move. From every fortified barbican, every shielded balcony, the fire support squads of the strike force let fly. The deafening sound reverberated around the depression, from overlapping explosions to shrieks of propellant. Riken Port was turned into a killing field, as the heavy weapons of Sendini's own 5th Company and the 9th Company reserves shredded dozens of Xenos every second. The first wave of Tyranids disappeared in detonations of gore and flame, but more were coming. At their officer's command, the garrison soldiers turned their firepower on the Xenos also. Volleys of irregular lasgun fire from the terrified men and women stabbed out, but their discipline was failing. Suddenly, a rumble, like an earthquake, shook Riken, unheard over the din of weapons, but certainly felt. The soldiers of the garrison staggered. The chunks of ferrocrete rained down, striking human, alien, and Astartes alike, and fissures snaked across the port. This soon proved to be no natural earthquake. Fountains of rock and earth erupted across the landing zone, many even bursting up within buildings. From them crawled sinuous, hook-limbed monsters. In the center of the landing zone, the ferrocrete apron collapsed, revealing the ravaged foundations that lay beneath. A honeycomb of tunnel openings was exposed, and from every one crawled more and more Tyranids. Looking down, Sandini saw that the Xenos had bored through solid ferrocrete. This was no quick accomplishment. The entire area had been well prepared. Bulbous, floating creatures now advanced amongst the Tyranids still sweeping forward from the gatehouse. Their fluted spines crackled with power, discharging bolts of energy that incinerated soldiers and melted through power armor. A hulking leader beast also waded through the lesser bioforms, its deliberate movements displaying a dark intellect. At the Psycho Beast's arrival, a strange malaise seemed to take hold of the garrison. Soldiers screamed and clutched their heads. Some tore at their eyes, or suddenly attacked their squad mates. Worse was yet to come. The Blood Angels on the ground were forced to engage in individual squad combat, their cohesion and firepower reduced by the need to defend against the Xenos now in their midst. They pulled back to second lines of defense as serpentine horrors slithered towards them at unnatural speeds. On upper balconies, their battle brothers slaughtered Tyranids still, but suddenly grasping claws and talons tore at their backs as broods of gene-stealers burst from within the buildings. Captain Sandini, fighting with his warriors in ever-shrinking pockets, called in aerial support. When it arrived, it was only a fraction of what he had prepared. From orbit, the breathless shipmaster revealed that they were fighting for their lives, many of Sandini's gunships already defending against boarding actions. The bioships that had initially fled had returned with more of their kind, living vessels that must have hidden themselves motionless in the dark reaches of the system. Sandini mastered his frustration. His strategic acumen spurred into action even as he savaged the Xenos before him. It was then that the garrison's troops erupted with etheric power. Soldiers vomited black flame, or ejected ribbons of energy from flailing arms, consuming their fellow soldiers and Xenos alike. The Psycho Beasts and a looming leader bioform advanced on them as more horrific phenomena manifested. Clearly, these were the doings of the Tyranid witch breeds, but whether any of the Blood Angels would survive to report this new horror, Sandini did not know. His warriors were dying. Bellic Alphas was falling, and hope was fading fast. And that's the end of that. I believe this will carry on as we get to the Arks of Omen. And if you've read the Dante novels as well, there's a lot of stuff in there. But yeah, the Arks of Omen, when I get round to doing that, which will be soon, you'll get a bit of an update on how things have progressed for the Blood Angels. And there's a couple of other little campaign things, but stay tuned anyway. It's all going to join up together into some big space opera type thing. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. More stuff coming soon. Like I say, Arks of Omen is coming soon, and a couple of other big videos are in the works. But for now, that's this, the part of the Psychic Awakening series, this campaign, where we cover all the different, various different factions in 40k in the wake of the fall of Cadia. And I've done a couple now, so yeah. We're working along. There's some things I missed. because this was out a while ago, and I can barely remember most of it, to be honest. So it's quite refreshing to go through it all again. Thank you all for watching again, and thank you to everybody supporting the channel. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Your names are going by here. You are heroes. If you'd like to support the channel, please do consider using the links below. But please do give the video a like and a comment. That massively helps with the algorithm, and I could do with all the help I can get with the channel. Really, really appreciate it. I'll be back again very, very soon. And yeah, I love Blood Angel stuff. Devastation of BAAL, if you've never read that novel, definitely get that. That's the prelude to all this here. And I think definitely Guy Haley's best novel, and one of the sort of, definitely in the top 10, or maybe even top 5 for me in terms of 40k novels. Devastation of BAAL, highly recommend. I'll be back again soon with more stuff. Thank you all for watching, and may the Emperor protect. Bye-bye.